Okay, the next presentation is by Mark Mazzola from USDA ARS Tree Fruit Research Center Laboratory in Wenatchee. And he'll be talking about progress in Brassicaceae, seed meal formulation and application for replant disease control in organic apple orchards. Mark.
Thanks, Wojciech. So now we go below ground where things are 10 times more complex and some would argue 10 times more interesting, others not so much. So our program is looking at trying to develop non-fumigant means to control soil-borne diseases. In my program, replant disease is the focal point. The use of brassicas, mustards, canola, your favorite vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, in organic systems as a kind of a green manure crop has been something that has been a focal point for some time. In our system, we actually use the seed meal of mustards or canola, which is the waste product of the oil extraction process. And the reason why we're using seed meals is because the use of this mechanism or that approach to managing replant disease in our hands has been totally ineffectual. Other benefits of using a seed meal approach is the fact that you have a 6% nitrogen material, so you get some nice fertility management out of that. We can control rates using this approach rather than this approach. So what we're trying to control is this phenomenon. This is probably a worst case scenario. Here we have Galon M26 going in a non-treated replant orchard setting. The same site where we grew trees in methyl bromide fumigated soils. So we can see the growth response through soil fumigation. And this is what we're trying to control as far as the biological complex. Many different species of fungi, including members of the genera Cylindercarpon, Rhizoctonia, oomycetes, including Phytophthora and Pythium, and plant parasitic nematodes, predominantly in our system, Pratolanchus penetrans. The way that we apply it is very straightforward. We apply our seed meal, we rotivate it into the soil system, and we tarp it with a VIF, a virtually impermeable film. And what we know in this system is that although the use of brassicas is suggested due to the fact that it produces glucosinolates, which the hydrolysis products of those compounds yield various biologically active materials, including isothiocyanates. In our system, we've studied the various mechanisms by which we attain pathogen suppression. And while chemistry is involved oftentimes, in some systems or some fungal pathogens, it's actually biology is playing a greater role, if not the exclusive role, relative to chemistries. What we find in using that VAF TARP, we need to do that to optimize not only chemical control mechanisms, because we're retaining that volatile, which some of these isothiocyanates are, but also to achieve optimal levels of biologically mediated disease suppression. After that incorporation, we need to let that system rest for a period of at least 6 weeks, and then we plant it. And that's to avoid things like phytotoxicity. And so we've conducted 10 trials over in 6 different orchard locations, each trial ranging from 3 to 6 years. And what we've found, just overall general conclusions, is that when we use independent seed meals, so a seed meal from one specific Brassica species, we've never been able to achieve disease suppression. So if we use them independently, we've always attained disease control failure. And that failure we've always been able to trace back to the biology of the disease complex. So for instance, if we use canola meal is actually a great substrate for things like Pythium. If we use yellow mustard, which is Brassica juncea, unfortunately things like Phytophthora cactorum and Phytophthora cambivora, again, like to use that as a substrate. So based upon our knowledge of how the biology responds to these different seed meals, we decided to look at, can we generate a formulation which would provide overall suppression of that complex target that we're after? So this is just the formulation that we chose initially was composed of Brassica juncea and Sinapis alba. And again, that formulation was based upon our knowledge of how these materials interact with the various pathogens that we're interested in. So the first site was an orchard soil that had a pH of 4.9. Organic matter of 4.2%, and was a sandy loam. Again, the formulation was a combination of Brassicaceae and Sinapis alba. The material was applied in the spring of planting. So this was April in 2010. We removed the tarp 1 week later, and then we planted that site a month later. So about a 5-week period between application and subsequent planting of that site. This is increase in, or this is tree diameter over the course of, well, up until last week. This last measurement was just taken last week as far as tree diameter. What we find actually, here's our seed meal in the green, and it's actually doing significantly better than our non-treated check. If we look at adjacent trees in the Tilo and C17 treated plots, we can see that it's actually the seed meal treatment and believe me, I've never seen this before, so take it for what it's worth. The seed meal treatment is actually doing significantly better than our fumigated trees, and obviously significantly better than the control. Why? Why is our seed meal treatment doing better than the fumigation treatment? Well, if we look at P penetrans numbers, these are actually root densities at the end of the first growing season. So here's our no treatment control, our fumigation, and our seed meal treatment. In this particular instance, the seed meal application actually did a significantly better job at controlling Pratylenchus penetrans than did our Tilo and chloropicrin pre-plant soil fumigation. However, even though we had some nematode suppression here by the end of the first growing season, if we look at season number 2, the end of the second growing season, we see that our seed meal treatment, they're still lower than the control, but look what happens in our fumigated plots. So we've gone from about 300 nematodes per gram of root to over 800. And we talked, Nick talked this morning about ecosystem services, and you look at ecosystem resiliency. In this system, we have a much more resilient soil environment than is our fumigated treatment with regards to having the capacity to suppress reinfestation by Pratylenchus penetrans. If we look at this particular soil biologically, we find that we have an enhancement in predatory nematodes. We have an increase in abundance of nematode trapping fungi like Arthrobotrys. We have increases in nematophagous fungi like Plectosphaerella. So we believe that we've created a nematode suppressive environment through our seed meal amendment, which obviously provides us with in this particular instance, a more resilient system than our fumigated plots. Again, this is an exception to the rule. We actually got excellent weed control at this particular site. Now, weed control with mustard seed meals is inherently variable. It's, what's in your weed seed bank? Okay, number 1, which mustard are you using? Number 2, what are the environmental conditions at the time that you applied the material? So this is actually 2 months after planting. We had about 85% reduction in overall weed biomass from these plots. Looks great. Nothing that I would ever pin hopes on ever again, but just an example of what one might attain. So the second site was actually the Sunrise WSU orchard that you're going to visit tomorrow. This particular site has a pH of 6.6, so much closer to neutrality than the previous site. A very low organic matter, only about 1.2%. If you would like to have the beach experience without the water, this is a great place to go. Pure sand at least the block that we have access to. In this particular trial, we used 2 different formulations, Brassicaceae and Sinapis alba again, but a second formulation was Brassicaceae and B napus, canola meal. We had 2 different application dates, the fall prior to planting, and as in the previous trial, the spring of planting. The tarp again was removed after 1 week, and we planted this site to Gala on either M9 or G11. And just to take a step back, the previous experiment was on G11 rootstock. So this is what the trees looked like on plots where we applied the seed meal in the autumn prior to planting. So they're looking fairly healthy. On blocks where we applied the seed meal in the spring of planting, we had abundant tree death. So we have a very good herbicide in this particular instance. So at this particular site, one would obviously want to utilize the material as an application in the fall prior to planting. This is just tree mortality at that site and looking at how the change in application date influenced that particular attribute. We can see in our spring, if we applied in the spring, we have an increase in mortality, but it was pretty much confined to G11 and not M9, which I have absolutely no means to explain. Some sensitivity to the ionic thiocyanate, perhaps, a relative difference in that particular attribute. But again, when we applied the material in the autumn prior to planting, substantial reduction in tree mortality. As far as M9, it was no different than the fumigated check. If we look at growth, so this is the Gala on G11. So all of our seed meal and fumigation treatments are up here. There's no significant difference amongst any of those treatments, except for tree mortality, but not as far as tree growth is concerned. And here's our check. But no difference in application timing or the formulation that was utilized. With M9, it was a little bit different, not statistically. All of these values here, again, are the same statistically, but our B. Juntia Sinapis alba treatment seems to be at least trending superior than some of our B. Juntia B. napus treatment, at least with M9. And M9, if you look at things like susceptibility to pythium, it is more susceptible than G11. And B. napus has that tendency to increase pythium populations and root infection. But we take advantage of B. Juntia to try to suppress those populations. So there might be some interaction that we need to be concerned with when utilizing this material with M9. We need to really focus on the B. Juntia Sinapis alba combination rather than trying to get away with B. Juntia B. napus. So just to summarize, and this is really based upon previous work, controlling replant disease with individual seed meal amendments is not going to be a viable alternative, at least not in my hands. Formulations can yield fumigant levels of disease control, and I think can enhance system resiliency from a biological perspective. Use of seed meals in plant production systems, not just in orchard systems. We really need to enhance our knowledge of activity spectrum, modes of action. We know that in our studies that every pathogen that we've looked at has had a different, from a biological perspective, has been susceptible to a different mode of action as far as disease suppression is concerned. And we need to look at the influence of soil system to avoid unintended consequences, such as using seed meals as an unintended herbicide. So we need to know a little bit more about impacts of the system that we're utilizing these materials in order to use them effectively. So as far as funding, USDA OREI was the primary funder of this project, some funds from OFRF, and the people involved over the time, Lori Hoagland, who is now at Purdue, Jack Brown at the University of Idaho, and people in my lab. Thanks.